The sun beats down on a battlefield drenched in chaos. Iron chariots, once mighty and unstoppable, lie stuck in the mud, their power stripped away by a sudden and violent storm. In the distance, a figure runs, fleeing from the destruction that has swallowed his army. This is Sisera, the feared general of the Canaanites, desperate to escape a fate he never imagined. But little does he know, his downfall won't come at the hands of a warrior. Instead, it will be delivered by an unlikely hero, a woman. This is the story of Barak, the general of Israel who led his people to victory, but not without the guidance of a prophetess and the courage of a simple woman. It's a story about faith, leadership, and the unexpected ways God brings about deliverance. Today, we dive into a biblical tale that defies expectations and shows us how, with God, even the impossible can be achieved. In Barak's time, Israel was in the midst of a great struggle. The people of Israel had repeatedly turned away from God's commands, and as a result, they found themselves under the harsh rule of King Jabin of Canaan. This oppression was not just political but also spiritual. For 20 long years, Jabin's commander, Sisera, terrorized Israel with his powerful army. The weight of their oppression seemed unbearable, and the Israelites cried out to God for deliverance. This period of oppression was marked by fear and uncertainty. Sisera's army boasted 900 iron chariots, a technological advantage that made them nearly invincible in battle. The Israelites, by comparison, were vastly outnumbered and outmatched. They were scattered and weak, unable to unite against their oppressors. In these dire circumstances, they desperately needed someone to lead them back to freedom, a leader who would trust in God's power over Sisera's might. Despite their cries for help, there was no immediate deliverance. Israel had strayed too far from God, and the consequences of their disobedience were playing out in real time. The people were not just oppressed physically. Their spiritual state was in shambles. They had forgotten the laws of their ancestors, forsaken the covenant, and embraced the gods of their oppressors. The time had come for them to remember their true God, but they needed a leader to guide them. It was during this period of turmoil that Deborah, a prophetess and judge, emerged. She held court under a palm tree, offering wisdom and guidance to the people of Israel. But Deborah wasn't just any judge. She was a beacon of hope in a dark time. Her leadership was a stark contrast to the chaos around her. Yet, even she knew that Israel needed more than her spiritual leadership. They needed a warrior to confront Sisera's army. Deborah received a word from God, instructing her to call on Barak, a military leader from the tribe of Naphtali. Barak was chosen by God to lead Israel's forces in battle against Sisera, but his response would reveal the inner struggle of a man facing overwhelming odds. He wasn't a hero eager to rush into battle. Rather, he was a man hesitant, knowing that victory seemed impossible without divine intervention. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic military confrontations in Israel's history, but Barak's story would not be one of simple heroism. It would be a tale of faith, reliance on God, and an unexpected partnership that would turn the tide of the battle. Barak was not the typical warrior leader we often imagine when thinking of ancient battles. He wasn't seeking glory or renown. In fact, he seemed hesitant when Deborah called him to action. This reluctance wasn't due to lack of courage, but rather a profound understanding of the challenge ahead. Barak knew the strength of Sisera's army. 900 iron chariots was an insurmountable force by human standards. To lead Israel against such power required not just military strategy, but a deep trust in God's promises. When Deborah called Barak to lead Israel's army, she delivered God's command directly. Barak was instructed to gather 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun and march to Mount Tabor. From there, God promised to deliver Sisera's army into his hands. But Barak's response was revealing. He agreed to go, but only if Deborah would accompany him. This request was not a sign of weakness, but a reflection of Barak's faith. He understood that Deborah, as a prophetess, was God's chosen representative, and without her presence, he feared that God's favor might not be with him. This moment between Deborah and Barak highlights an important truth about leadership in the Bible. Barak was not ashamed to admit his dependence on Deborah's guidance. In fact, His reliance on her presence showed a deep humility. He knew that victory would not come by his strength alone but through God's power. Deborah agreed to go with him, but she also prophesied that the glory of the victory would not be his. Instead, God would deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. Barak's reluctance to lead on his own might seem surprising, but it speaks to a broader theme of human weakness and divine strength. Throughout the Bible, God often chooses leaders who, in their humility, recognize their need for him. Barak was not a man of arrogance. He was a man who knew the odds were stacked against him and that only God could turn the situation in Israel's favor. His willingness to depend on Deborah was a testament to his faith. Barak's story teaches us that true leadership is not about going it alone but about recognizing the need for support. Whether that support comes from fellow believers or from directly seeking God's guidance, the lesson is clear. Victory comes through faith, not pride. Barak, despite his initial hesitation, was obedient to God's command. This obedience set the stage for an incredible victory, but it would come in a way no one expected. As Barak prepared for battle, the dynamics of leadership between him and Deborah showed the power of collaboration and trust in God's promises. But the real surprise was yet to come, as another unexpected figure would soon enter the story and change the course of the battle. Deborah was no ordinary woman in Israel. She was a prophetess and judge, holding a position of immense influence in a time when such roles were rare for women. Her leadership was not rooted in military might or political power, but in wisdom and divine guidance. Under the shade of a palm tree, Deborah would offer counsel to the people, settling disputes and providing spiritual direction. In a land suffering under oppression, her presence was a beacon of hope for those seeking answers from God. Her role as a prophetess meant that Deborah received direct revelation from God, making her one of the few leaders in Israel with such authority. When she called Barak to lead the army, it wasn't her personal opinion but a divine command. This distinction was crucial because it highlighted the source of her authority, God himself. Deborah was not only respected for her wisdom but for her ability to speak God's will to the people, guiding them through their darkest days. Deborah's partnership with Barak was a reflection of how God often works through collaboration. While Barak was the military leader, Deborah's presence was essential for the spiritual assurance of victory. She didn't hesitate to take action when God commanded it, and she served as both a counselor and a partner in the mission to defeat Sisera. Her strength came from her unwavering faith, and her leadership was a testament to the idea that God can use anyone, regardless of gender, to fulfill his plans. One of the most remarkable aspects of Deborah's role was her willingness to step into a traditionally male-dominated space. In a time when women were often relegated to the background, Deborah led Israel with authority and grace. She broke barriers, not by force, but by the undeniable evidence of God's hand on her life. Her story is a powerful reminder that God does not see limitations in the way that people do. He equips and calls individuals based on their faith and obedience, not their societal status. Deborah's leadership wasn't about claiming glory for herself. It was about ensuring that Israel returned to God. She didn't seek recognition or power. Instead, she faithfully carried out her role as a prophetess and judge, always pointing back to the one who truly led Israel. Her humility and strength in following God's command stand in stark contrast to the chaos and fear that plagued Israel during this time of oppression. Through her role, Deborah demonstrates the importance of spiritual leadership. Her wisdom, courage, and obedience to God were crucial in guiding Barak and Israel to victory. But as the story unfolds, another unexpected player would rise to the forefront, taking everyone by surprise with a bold act of faith. When Barak was first approached by Deborah to lead Israel's army, his reaction wasn't one of immediate confidence. Instead, Barak hesitated. He recognized the weight of the task at hand, and the sheer force of Sisera's army loomed large in his mind. Barak wasn't a coward, but he was cautious. This hesitation came from a deep awareness of the enemy's power and the overwhelming odds stacked against him. In many ways, Barak's reaction was relatable. He saw the challenge and wasn't sure he could face it alone. Barak's condition to Deborah, that he would only go if she accompanied him, speaks volumes about his understanding of leadership. He knew that Deborah's presence symbolized God's favor, and he wasn't willing to face such an overwhelming battle without divine assurance. Barak's request was not a sign of weakness, but rather a reflection of his faith. He knew that the presence of a prophetess meant that God was truly with them. Without Deborah, Barak felt incomplete in his mission. Deborah agreed to go with Barak, but she also gave him a prophecy. The victory would not bring him personal glory. Instead, God would deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. This prophecy added another layer to Barak's journey. He would be the military leader, but the ultimate act of victory would not be his to claim. Despite this, Barak accepted his role and moved forward, showing his willingness to obey even when the outcome wasn't as he might have envisioned. Barak's need for Deborah's presence also highlights an important theme in the Bible: the strength that comes from collaboration and reliance on others. Barak understood his limitations and sought support from someone who could offer spiritual guidance. This partnership between Barak and Deborah illustrates how God often works through the unity of his people, each bringing different strengths to the table. Barak's hesitation led him to seek out the very support that would ensure success in the battle. There's a powerful lesson here about leadership. Barak wasn't afraid to admit that he needed help. He recognized that the challenge before him required more than just physical strength or military strategy. It required God's direct involvement, and he knew that Deborah's presence was the key to accessing that divine intervention. In asking her to join him, Barak showed humility and wisdom, qualities that are often overlooked in leaders who are expected to act with unshakable confidence. As Barak and Deborah set out to gather the troops and prepare for battle, his story reminds us that hesitation doesn't have to be a weakness. Instead, it can be the catalyst for seeking out the right support and acknowledging our dependence on God's guidance. Barak's faith in Deborah's role set the stage for an unexpected victory, and as we'll see, the fulfillment of God's prophecy would come through another surprising figure. As Barak prepared to face Sisera's formidable army, the battle plan took shape under divine guidance. Deborah had instructed Barak to take 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them to Mount Tabor. This mountain, with its elevated position, gave Barak's forces a strategic advantage, but it wasn't enough on its own. Sisera's army, with its 900 iron chariots, was a force to be reckoned with. These chariots represented the cutting edge of military technology at the time, making Sisera's army nearly unbeatable in the open plains. God's plan, however, didn't rely on Israel's military strength or strategic positioning alone. Barak and his men would have to trust that God would deliver them from what seemed like an insurmountable challenge. The battle plan was simple. Barak would lead his troops down from Mount Tabor when the time was right, and God would do the rest. It was a test of faith not just for Barak, but for the entire nation of Israel. They had to believe that victory was possible, even against overwhelming odds. As Barak's troops gathered at Mount Tabor, the tension must have been palpable. Sisera's forces were well-equipped and well-trained, while Israel's army was smaller and less experienced. From a human perspective, the battle seemed impossible to win. But Deborah's presence reminded Barak and his men that this wasn't just a military conflict. It was a spiritual one. God had promised victory, and it was up to Barak to trust that promise. When the moment arrived, Deborah gave the signal, "Go! This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" With these words, Barak led his men charging down from Mount Tabor towards Sisera's army. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. God intervened, sending a torrential rainstorm that flooded the battlefield. The iron chariots, which had been Sisera's greatest advantage, became his greatest weakness. Stuck in the mud, the chariots were rendered useless, and Sisera's army was thrown into chaos. Barak's forces, empowered by the divine intervention, overpowered Sisera's men with ease. The battle that seemed so impossible just moments before was now completely turned in Israel's favor. Sisera's army was defeated, and the soldiers fled in every direction. What Barak had feared, the overwhelming might of Sisera's chariots, had been neutralized by God's intervention. This victory was not just a military triumph, but a clear demonstration of God's power and faithfulness to his people. Though the battle was won, the story wasn't over. Sisera himself managed to escape on foot, leaving his army behind. What followed would be another surprising twist in this already extraordinary tale, as God's prophecy about a woman claiming the victory was about to be fulfilled in an unexpected way. As Sisera fled the battlefield, abandoning his chariot and escaping on foot, he sought refuge in the tent of a woman named Jael. She was the wife of Heber the Kenite, a man who had made peace with King Jabin of Canaan. This relationship gave Sisera the confidence that Jael's tent would be a safe place to hide. Exhausted from the battle and desperate for safety, Sisera believed that he could trust Jael, but he would soon discover that appearances can be deceiving. Jael welcomed Sisera into her tent with apparent hospitality. She offered him a place to rest and gave him milk to drink, an act that would make him feel even more secure. Sisera, now trusting Jael completely, asked her to stand guard at the entrance and lie to anyone who might come looking for him. He was certain that he had found a place to recover and regain his strength before continuing his escape. What Sisera didn't know was that Jael had other plans. As Sisera drifted into a deep sleep, Jael made a decision that would change the course of the story. Armed with nothing more than a tent peg and a hammer, she approached the sleeping general and drove the peg through his temple, killing him instantly. In this unexpected moment, Jael, a seemingly insignificant woman, became the one to fulfill Deborah's prophecy. God had delivered Sisera into the hands of a woman, just as he had foretold. Jael's actions were shocking, but they were also a clear demonstration of divine intervention. God had chosen to use her, a woman without any military training or political power, to deliver the final blow to the oppressor of Israel. Her bravery and decisive action were crucial to Israel's victory over Sisera. Jael, like Deborah, became an unlikely hero in a story filled with unexpected turns. This moment in the story highlights the way God often works through the most unlikely individuals. Jael's courage, in the face of danger, shows that God's plans are not limited by human expectations or societal roles. Just as Deborah had taken on the role of judge and prophetess, Jael, too, stepped into a position of leadership when it mattered most. Both women played essential roles in the defeat of Sisera, showing that God can use anyone, regardless of their status, to fulfill his purposes. The death of Sisera marked the end of Canaanite oppression over Israel. Barak's victory on the battlefield, combined with Jael's decisive act, brought peace to the land. The Israelites were reminded that deliverance comes not through human strength alone, but through faith in God's ability to work through the most unexpected means. Jael's story became a symbol of God's power to use ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Barak's victory over Sisera's army was not just a triumph of military strategy, but a testament to faith and obedience. While Barak led the charge with 10,000 men, it was clear that this victory was the result of God's divine intervention. Barak's leadership was crucial, but it was Deborah's guidance that directed him to follow God's command. Together, they formed a partnership that demonstrated how faith, humility, and reliance on God's word can overcome even the most impossible odds. Deborah had been clear from the beginning that the victory would not bring Barak personal glory. Yet, despite knowing this, Barak faithfully carried out the plan. His obedience to God's instructions, given through Deborah, led to the crushing defeat of Sisera's forces. The unexpected rainstorm that turned the battlefield into a muddy trap for Sisera's iron chariots was a clear sign that God was with Barak's army. This miracle was a direct answer to the Israelites' cries for deliverance. The aftermath of the battle was a complete rout of the Canaanite forces. Sisera's men were scattered and defeated, and with their leader dead at the hands of Jael, the Canaanites' stronghold over Israel was broken. Barak's faith had been tested, and through his reliance on Deborah and God's promises, Israel had been delivered from their oppressors. This victory wasn't just about military success. It was about restoring Israel's faith in God's protection and guidance. Barak's leadership shines through in his ability to accept help, particularly from Deborah. His initial hesitation in leading the army alone wasn't a sign of weakness, but rather a recognition of the need for God's guidance through Deborah. In working together, Barak and Deborah demonstrated that true leadership involves humility and a willingness to follow God's direction, even when it doesn't align with human expectations of power and glory. The victory over Sisera wasn't just a story of physical conquest. It was also a spiritual victory for Israel. After years of oppression, they were reminded that their strength came from God, not from their own might or military prowess. Barak's role in this victory, guided by Deborah's prophetic wisdom, brought peace to the land and restored Israel's faith in their covenant with God. Barak's story teaches us that leadership is not about seeking personal glory, but about faithfully carrying out God's will. His partnership with Deborah was a powerful example of how faith and obedience can bring about victory, even in the face of overwhelming odds. But while the battle had been won, the lessons of Barak's story continued to resonate, especially when we reflect on the importance of female leadership in his journey. After the crushing defeat of Sisera's army at the hands of Barak, Deborah, and their forces, the attention turned to Sisera himself. Despite the chaos that ensued on the battlefield, Sisera had managed to escape on foot. His once mighty army was destroyed, and his chariots, the symbol of his power, were rendered useless by the sudden and miraculous rainstorm. Sisera, a once feared general, was now fleeing for his life, alone and vulnerable. Sisera's fate took an unexpected turn when he sought refuge in the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. In a moment of desperation, he trusted her hospitality, believing that her tent was a safe haven. What Sisera did not realize was that Jael's allegiance was not with him but with Israel. While Sisera slept, exhausted from the battle, Jael seized the opportunity to act decisively, driving a tent peg through his temple and ending his life. The prophecy given by Deborah had come to pass. God had delivered Sisera into the hands of a woman. Sisera's death marked the final blow to Canaanite oppression. With their feared general gone and their army defeated, the Canaanites' grip on Israel was broken. This event was not only the end of a military leader, but also the end of a period of severe oppression for the people of Israel. The once invincible Sisera had fallen, not at the hands of Barak or another warrior, but by the unexpected bravery of a woman. Jael's role in Sisera's demise was a turning point in the story. While Barak and his army had secured the victory on the battlefield, it was Jael who ultimately fulfilled the prophecy. Sisera's death signaled a shift in the power dynamics in the region, freeing Israel from the threat of Canaanite domination. This act of courage from an unlikely hero completed the cycle of deliverance that Deborah had foreseen. The significance of Sisera's death goes beyond the physical victory. It was a symbol of God's power over even the mightiest of oppressors. Sisera, who had relied on his military strength and the technological superiority of his chariots, fell in the most humble of settings. His defeat was a reminder that no one is beyond the reach of God's justice, and that God often works through unexpected means to achieve his purposes. With Sisera dead and the Canaanite forces decimated, Israel was able to experience a time of peace. This victory not only freed them from immediate oppression, but also renewed their faith in God's ability to deliver them, no matter how dire the situation. The story of Sisera's fall is a reminder that even the most powerful enemies can be brought down by the hand of God, and that victory is often found in the most unexpected places. One of the most striking aspects of Barak's story is the significant role that female leadership played in Israel's victory. In a time when leadership was typically male-dominated, both Deborah and Jael emerged as central figures, showing that God's plans often defy societal norms. Deborah, as a prophetess and judge, held a unique position of authority, guiding the nation of Israel both spiritually and strategically. Without her leadership, Barak may never have taken the step to lead the army into battle. Deborah's role as a prophetess was not incidental. It was a direct demonstration of God's willingness to use women in leadership roles when the situation required it. Her authority came from God, and she was not just an advisor but the key figure who relayed God's commands to Barak. She exemplified wisdom, courage, and faith, qualities that were essential in steering Israel through a dark period of oppression. Deborah's leadership wasn't limited to offering spiritual guidance. She played an active role in ensuring that God's will was carried out on the battlefield. Barak's reliance on Deborah's presence highlights how crucial her leadership was. He refused to go into battle without her, understanding that her connection to God's guidance was vital for success. This partnership between Barak and Deborah challenges traditional notions of leadership by showing that true strength comes from collaboration, regardless of gender. Deborah's wisdom and spiritual insight were as important as Barak's military prowess, and together, they were able to secure victory for Israel. Jael's unexpected role in the story further underscores the importance of female leadership. While she was not a military leader like Barak or a prophetess like Deborah, Jael's decisive action played a critical role in the outcome of the story. She became the instrument through which God delivered Sisera into the hands of a woman, as Deborah had prophesied. Jael's courage and willingness to act showed that God often uses those who are underestimated to bring about his plans. The inclusion of both Deborah and Jael in the story sends a powerful message about the value of female leadership in God's plans. These women were not passive participants. They were active agents of change, each playing a pivotal role in Israel's deliverance. Their presence in the narrative challenges cultural expectations and emphasizes that God's choice of leaders is based on faith and obedience, not societal status or gender. Barak's story teaches us that leadership is not confined to a single gender. God raises up leaders according to his will, and he often works through those whom society might overlook. Deborah and Jael's contributions were essential to the success of Israel, showing that faith, courage, and obedience to God are the true markers of leadership. Their roles in the story serve as a reminder that God's plans often defy human expectations, and that leadership comes in many forms. The story of Barak, Deborah, and Jael offers timeless lessons that resonate far beyond the ancient battlefield. One of the most powerful takeaways from this story is the importance of faith in the face of overwhelming odds. Barak was tasked with leading a vastly outnumbered army against Sisera's iron chariots, an impossible task from a human perspective. Yet, through his faith in God and obedience to Deborah's guidance, Barak demonstrated that success isn't determined by numbers or military might, but by trust in God's promises. Another key lesson from Barak's story is the value of collaboration. Barak's willingness to rely on Deborah's spiritual insight showed that true leadership is not about going it alone. Barak recognized his need for Deborah's wisdom and presence, and his humility in seeking her help was a strength, not a weakness. This partnership between a military leader and a prophetess demonstrates how working together, each bringing their unique strengths, can lead to victory. In today's world, the story reminds us of the power of teamwork and the importance of seeking wisdom from others, especially in moments of doubt or uncertainty. The role of women in Barak's story also provides a profound lesson for today's society. Deborah and Jael were crucial in bringing about Israel's victory, showing that leadership is not confined by gender. Deborah's wisdom and spiritual authority and Jael's courageous actions reveal that God equips leaders based on their faith and willingness to act, regardless of societal expectations. This challenges modern perspectives on leadership and encourages us to recognize and value the contributions of all individuals, whether male or female. Barak's hesitation at the start of his journey is also an important lesson in human vulnerability. He wasn't fearless or eager to take on the challenge immediately. Instead, Barak was cautious, even reluctant, but this hesitation didn't disqualify him from being used by God. His story shows us that it's okay to have doubts and fears when faced with difficult tasks, but it's our response to God's call that matters most. Barak ultimately stepped into his role, trusting in God's plan, and through his faith, he led Israel to victory. Finally, Barak's story reminds us that God often works through the unexpected. Whether it was Deborah's leadership, Jael's decisive action, or the miraculous rainstorm that neutralized Sisera's chariots, the entire narrative is filled with moments where God intervened in ways no one could have predicted. This teaches us that God's plans may not always align with our expectations, but they are always perfect. We are called to trust in his timing and methods, even when the path seems unclear or unconventional. In today's world, Barak's story encourages us to trust in God's power, value the wisdom of others, embrace diversity in leadership, and step forward in faith, even when the odds seem impossible. It's a story of hope, faith, and the assurance that God can bring victory through the most unlikely means. As we look back on the story of Barak, Deborah, and Jael, one thing becomes clear: God's plans often unfold in ways we least expect. Barak's journey teaches us that true leadership isn't about personal glory. It's about obedience, humility, and the willingness to rely on others. Deborah's wisdom and faith, along with Jael's boldness, were pivotal in securing Israel's victory. Together, these individuals show us that God can use anyone to bring about His will, regardless of their position, strength, or status. Now, as you reflect on this incredible story, ask yourself, how is God calling you to step into faith, even when the odds seem impossible? What unlikely partnerships or unexpected sources of help has He placed in your life? Remember, victory comes not by our power alone, but through our trust in God's timing and plan. If you found this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to continue exploring more incredible biblical stories with us. And as promised, here's a prayer of blessing for you. May God guide you, strengthen your faith, and lead you to victory in every challenge you face. May His unexpected ways bring you closer to His perfect will. Finally, if this story resonated with you, comment the word victory below, and let's walk in faith together as we discover more about how God works in our lives.